The black maid intervened when a guest collapsed, and the Mafia boss saw a bravery money could not buy. Jasmine Carter, a 28-year-old maid, had been working at the luxurious Romano mansion for over a year. It wasn't an easy job, long hours, constant demands, and little recognition. But Jasmine had learned to live with it. She kept her head down, did her work, and never asked for anything more. The Romano mansion was the epitome of wealth. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceilings, and expensive artwork adorned every wall. The family's dinners were held in lavish rooms with floors that sparkled like marble. Jasmine was just a small part of this grand world. Today, like any other, Jasmine was cleaning up after a grand dinner. The guests, all well-dressed and important in their own right, were sitting at the long table. Among them was Charles Montgomery, a high-ranking guest who always made his opinion about the staff very clear. Jasmine had seen him before, always with that dismissive attitude towards her and the other servants. But she had learned to ignore it. Her job wasn't to mingle with the guests, just to clean up after them. However, as the evening wore on, Jasmine noticed something strange. Charles had started to look pale, and his face twisted in discomfort. At first, she thought he might have been drunk, but then he suddenly collapsed onto the floor. The room fell silent. All eyes were on him. Panic set in. The other guests looked around, unsure of what to do, some even stepping back as if it were a disease. Jasmine's heart raced. She knew she had to act. Despite the stares from the guests, she rushed to Charles's side, checking for a pulse. She had no medical training, but instinct told her to help. She gently laid him on his back, using what little knowledge she had from seeing doctors around her mother when she was young. "Someone get help," she yelled, though it was clear no one was moving. The seconds felt like hours. Charles was gasping for breath, his face flushed with anxiety. Jasmine knew she couldn't wait for the doctor. Without thinking, she placed her hands on his chest, doing what she could to keep him calm. At that moment, the door swung open. Dominic Romano, the Mafia boss, entered the room. His presence was commanding, and the energy in the room shifted instantly. Jasmine didn't look up. She couldn't. She was focused solely on Charles. "What happened?" Dominic's voice boomed, and Jasmine flinched but didn't stop her efforts. "He collapsed. He needs help," she said urgently. Dominic didn't hesitate. He walked toward her, observing her actions. He had seen many things in his life: power, wealth, violence. But this was different. He was used to people looking up to him, afraid to act without his command. But here was Jasmine, a maid, risking everything to save a man who had mocked her and others like her. It struck him. There was something genuine about her. He had seen people do things for money, for status, for power, but Jasmine wasn't. She was simply trying to help. Dominic knelt beside her, grabbing his phone. "Get a doctor here, now," he ordered his men. As they hurried off, he turned back to Jasmine. "You did good," he said, his tone softer than usual. Jasmine looked up at him, finally meeting his eyes. His gaze was intense, but not threatening. It was respectful, and for the first time, she felt seen. Dominic stood, his posture still powerful. He looked around the room at the guests who had done nothing. "This man owes her his life, and you all owe her respect," he said, his voice carrying the weight of his authority. There was no more mockery. The room was silent, and Jasmine could feel the weight of his words sinking in. As the doctor arrived and Charles was taken care of, Jasmine remained standing, feeling a strange sense of pride and gratitude. She had never expected a moment like this, never expected someone like Dominic Romano to notice her, let alone respect her. And though the night had started with mockery, it ended with something more valuable: respect, not earned through wealth or status, but through courage and kindness. It's been 2 days since the incident in the Romano mansion, but Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just changed in ways she couldn't yet understand. She spent her days in the background, quietly cleaning, but her mind kept drifting back to that moment when everything had shifted. Dominic Romano, the infamous Mafia boss, had witnessed her act of courage. He hadn't just seen her, he had respected her, and that respect had sparked something in Jasmine that she couldn't quite name. The days following had been filled with the normal hustle of work, but everything felt different. Jasmine felt different. The other staff members, who had always looked at her with disdain, began to show her subtle nods of acknowledgement. They didn't speak to her directly, but their actions had changed. It was as if something had shifted in the very air of the mansion. She couldn't avoid the fact that she was now living in a world she'd never imagined. Her every action was being watched, not just by the guests and the staff, but by Dominic himself. The evenings were the hardest. The mansion felt both too big and too small at the same time. The vast marble halls echoed with the footsteps of the powerful and the beautiful, while Jasmine's quiet presence felt like it was fading into the background. She kept to herself, focusing on the work she'd always done, polishing the silver, arranging the flowers, sweeping the floors. But when she crossed paths with Dominic, something in the air seemed to change. He never spoke much to her directly, but his presence lingered. It was subtle at first, like a soft but undeniable tension that settled in the space between them. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was simply different. She had seen him around the mansion, of course. He was always impeccably dressed, with his dark hair slicked back and his gaze sharp, as though he could read people's souls with a single glance. His reputation preceded him, and though she had worked there for some time now, the full weight of his power and influence was something she still wasn't used to. But after that night, everything seemed to shift. He wasn't just a powerful man. He had a vulnerability to him. The way he had looked at her that night, when he told her she did good, was unlike anything she had ever seen from someone like him. It wasn't admiration exactly. It was more like understanding. And Jasmine felt her heart stir every time she thought of it. That evening, as she was walking down one of the grand hallways, she saw him again. Dominic was standing at the window, looking out over the city. His back was to her, but there was something about his stillness that made her stop. She didn't know why, but she felt compelled to approach. "Mr. Romano," she said softly, almost to herself. He turned slightly, acknowledging her with a brief glance. "Jasmine." His voice was calm, as always, but there was an edge to it now, a quiet respect that hadn't been there before. "I wanted to thank you," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "for what you said the other night." Dominic's eyes flicked to her, his gaze sharp but not unkind. "I meant it," he said simply. "You did good." It was strange, hearing him say those words again. They lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. Jasmine felt a wave of warmth rush over her. It was the first time in a long time that someone had looked at her and not seen just a maid. It was like she had been seen for who she really was, a person. "It's nothing," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. But Dominic wasn't convinced. He took a step toward her, his presence undeniable. "You're not just a maid, Jasmine," he said softly. His words hung in the air, and for the first time, she felt like they weren't just an acknowledgement of her actions. They were an acknowledgement of her worth. Jasmine blinked, surprised by the depth of his words. It wasn't just the compliment. It was the understanding in his eyes. Dominic Romano, a man known for his ruthlessness, had just acknowledged her as more than the help. She didn't know how to respond. She simply stood there, unsure of what to say. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely audible. For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of the unspoken words hanging between them. Dominic's gaze softened, just slightly. "You've earned more than you think." He turned away, but Jasmine could see a hint of something in his eyes, a flicker of respect, something rare and precious in his world. And just like that, the door closed softly behind him, leaving Jasmine standing alone in the hallway, her heart racing. She didn't know what had just happened or what it meant, but she knew one thing. Things had changed. And deep down, she couldn't help but wonder what the future held, not just for her, but for them. Days passed, and while the mansion remained as opulent as ever, Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed inside her. She still performed her duties, of course, polishing, cleaning, organizing, but everything felt different now. Her interactions with the other staff were less tense, and even the guests, who had once ignored her, seemed to take a second look, almost as if they were starting to see her as more than just a maid. It was the subtle shift in the way people regarded her that made her heart race. But it was Dominic's presence that lingered the most. There were moments when their paths would cross in the halls, and for some reason, she could feel the weight of his gaze on her, like he was always watching, always noticing. It wasn't in an invasive way. It was respect. The days blended into one another, yet Jasmine found herself caught in an internal battle. She had never been one to seek attention, never wanted to be more than what she was, but Dominic had done something to her. He had made her feel seen. He had made her feel valued. She couldn't deny it. His respect meant something to her, something she hadn't expected. One evening, as she was cleaning the grand dining room, the sound of footsteps caught her attention. She turned around to find Dominic standing in the doorway, his hands tucked in his pockets, his sharp suit catching the light. His eyes softened as they met hers, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. He looked at her like he wanted to say something, but couldn't quite find the words. "Jasmine," he finally said, his voice calm, yet filled with a new kind of weight. "I've noticed how hard you work." She straightened, taken aback. "Thank you, Mr. Romano. It's my job." "It's more than that," he said, stepping into the room. "You go above and beyond, and it hasn't gone unnoticed." Jasmine felt the color rise in her cheeks, unsure of how to respond. She had never craved praise, but hearing those words from him made her feel something she couldn't quite explain. "I just do what's needed," she said quietly, her eyes not meeting his. "It's not about just doing what's needed," he replied. "It's about making a difference. And you've done that." The room felt smaller in that moment, as if everything around them had faded into the background. Jasmine could feel her heart beating faster, the weight of his words settling in her chest. No one had ever spoken to her like this, not with such sincerity. "You've earned more than you know," he added, his voice almost a whisper. She looked up at him, her breath catching. "What do you mean?" The question was out before she could stop it. Dominic's gaze softened. "I see potential in you, Jasmine. More than just the maid you think you are." Jasmine's mind raced. She had always kept her head down, never dreaming of anything more than her current life. But here was Dominic, a man who had the world at his feet, telling her that she was capable of more. The idea was foreign, almost impossible. She had never thought of herself that way. "I don't understand," she murmured. "You don't have to," Dominic said. "But I can help you see it." For the first time, Jasmine felt a surge of something unfamiliar, hope. She had lived so long in the shadows of others, serving without complaint, without expectation. But Dominic had shown her a glimpse of a world beyond her current reality, one where she was more than just a servant. And as much as she tried to push it away, the idea of a different life, a life with possibilities, began to take root in her mind. "I don't know what to say," Jasmine replied, her voice barely audible. Dominic smiled, a soft, understanding smile that made her heart skip a beat. "You don't have to say anything. Just know that if you ever want more, I'll help you get there." His words hung in the air, and for a brief moment, Jasmine allowed herself to imagine what a life beyond the mansion could look like, what it might feel like to be something more than a maid. But the weight of reality came crashing back. She couldn't just walk away from everything she knew. She couldn't leave behind the life that had shaped her, no matter how different it felt now. But as Dominic turned to leave, he paused and glanced back at her. "You've got the strength to do more than you think, Jasmine. Don't forget that." With those words, he left her standing there, in the middle of the grand room, alone but somehow changed. Jasmine took a deep breath, her heart still racing. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in her life, she felt like there might be something more for her. Something beyond the walls of the Romano mansion. The days that followed were a blur for Jasmine. She couldn't seem to shake the conversation with Dominic, his words echoing in her mind long after he had left the room. "You've earned more than you know." It had been the simplest statement, yet it carried so much weight. It wasn't the kind of praise she was used to, empty words spoken just to placate her. No, this had been different. This was genuine. But it also stirred something deep inside of her, a longing for a life beyond the mansion, beyond the menial tasks she had done for years. She couldn't just go back to the way things were, not after everything Dominic had said. She knew she had a choice to make. The next few days passed, and Jasmine went through the motions of her work, cleaning the rooms, organizing the kitchen, doing everything that was expected of her. But her mind wasn't in it. She found herself looking at the other staff members, wondering if they felt the same weight on their shoulders, the same pull to something bigger. But no one else seemed to notice the shift. The mansion continued as it always had, luxurious, pristine, and indifferent to the lives that moved within it. Dominic, on the other hand, seemed to be everywhere. His presence was undeniable, like an unseen force that loomed over the house. Every time she crossed paths with him, she felt the tension between them, as if something was building, something neither of them could fully understand. She had tried to push those feelings aside. She wasn't foolish enough to think that someone like him would ever see her as anything more than the help. Yet, every time he spoke to her, every time his gaze lingered just a little too long, she couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was something more to it. It was on one of those long, quiet evenings when Jasmine found herself once again in the grand dining room, wiping down the already sparkling surfaces. The mansion was unusually quiet, the guests long gone, and most of the staff had finished their duties for the night. As she worked, she heard the sound of footsteps. She turned to see Dominic approaching, his usual confident stride matching the calmness of the night. He didn't say anything at first, just watched her, his dark eyes studying her with an intensity that made Jasmine's heart race. "You've been doing a lot of thinking lately, haven't you?" His voice was soft, almost too soft for someone of his stature, and it made Jasmine freeze in place. She wasn't sure how to respond. "I suppose," she said slowly, wiping a spot on the table even though it was already clean. "A lot's changed." Dominic didn't move, his gaze never leaving her face. "And how do you feel about that?" His question was direct, but there was an edge to it, an edge that suggested he already knew the answer. Jasmine swallowed hard, trying to find the right words. I'm not sure," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's just that I've never thought about what else is out there." Dominic took a step closer, his presence overwhelming in the large, empty room. "There's more out there, Jasmine," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that was impossible to ignore. "More than what you see here. More than being confined to this place." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. She looked up at him, searching his face for any hint of insincerity, but all she found was a quiet understanding. "I don't know if I'm ready for more," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I've spent my whole life in this world. I don't know anything else." Dominic's expression softened, his eyes reflecting something she couldn't quite place. Compassion, maybe. "You don't have to know it all right now," he said, taking another step closer. "But you deserve more than this. You deserve a choice." The words hit Jasmine like a wave, washing over her in a rush of emotion. She had never thought of herself as deserving of anything more. She had always been the maid, the one who served without question. But Dominic was offering her something else, something she had never dared to hope for. "I don't know what to do with that," she said, her voice shaking. Dominic reached out, gently touching her arm in a way that was both comforting and electrifying. "That's why I'm here," he said softly. "To help you find it." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Jasmine couldn't find the words to respond. Instead, she simply nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. For the first time in her life, she felt as if she were standing on the edge of something bigger than herself, something that could change everything. She wasn't sure what the future held, but in that moment, standing there with Dominic, she knew one thing for certain. Her life would never be the same again. The next few weeks were a blur for Jasmine. Every time she passed Dominic in the halls of the mansion, her heart raced. He was everywhere, his presence looming, yet calm and composed, as if he knew things she couldn't begin to understand. Despite the tension between them, Jasmine couldn't deny the pull she felt every time he spoke to her. She didn't want to admit it, but she found herself looking for reasons to cross his path, to feel the weight of his gaze on her again. It was confusing, but also exhilarating. She had lived her whole life avoiding attention, staying out of the spotlight, but now, everything felt different. It wasn't just the way he treated her, it was the way he made her feel. For the first time, Jasmine felt seen. Dominic had given her a glimpse of something bigger, something beyond the walls of the mansion. It had been one simple conversation, but it had set something in motion. Jasmine knew she couldn't go back to the way things were before, not after that night. She spent her days lost in thought, wondering what her life could be like if she took that leap. But the idea of stepping outside the life she had known for so long terrified her. She didn't know how to break free, didn't know what it would mean for her future. But as the days passed, she found herself growing more restless. She had always been good at keeping her emotions in check, but now they bubbled to the surface. One evening, after finishing her duties for the day, Jasmine found herself walking along the grand hallway of the mansion. The moonlight filtered through the tall windows, casting soft shadows on the marble floors. She stopped in front of the library, her fingers lightly grazing the doorframe. She wasn't sure why she was here, but something had drawn her to this spot. It was quiet, peaceful, almost too peaceful. And then, she heard footsteps. She turned to find Dominic approaching, his expression unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes when he saw her. "Jasmine," he said, his voice low and steady. "What are you doing here?" It was a simple question, but it made Jasmine's heart skip a beat. She couldn't tell him that she was lost in her thoughts, thinking about him, about everything that had changed since their conversation. Instead, she shrugged, trying to play it off. "Just thinking." Dominic nodded, his gaze never leaving her face. There was something about him, something about the way he looked at her, that made her feel exposed. It was as if he could see right through her, like he knew exactly what she was feeling. And that terrified her. "You've been thinking a lot, haven't you?" he asked softly, taking a step closer. Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. "How did he know?" She started, but the words didn't come. "It's all right," Dominic said, his voice gentle. "I've been thinking too. About you. About what you want." His words sent a shiver down her spine. What did he mean by that? Did he know something she didn't? Did he know what she was afraid to admit? "I don't know what I want," Jasmine finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've never really had a choice. Not like this." Dominic stepped closer, his gaze steady. "You do now," he said, his voice soft but firm. "You have more choices than you think, Jasmine. More than you've ever allowed yourself to believe." Jasmine didn't know what to say. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that there was something more out there for her. But she didn't know how to take that first step. She had spent so long being invisible, so long playing the role of the maid, that the idea of being anything more felt impossible. Dominic seemed to sense her hesitation. "You don't have to have all the answers right now," he said, his voice calm. "But know that you're not alone in this. Whatever you choose, I'll be here. And I'll help you." His words were like a lifeline, but Jasmine still couldn't shake the fear that gripped her. It wasn't just the fear of change, it was the fear of being seen for who she truly was, of letting someone in, of exposing herself to someone who could change everything. "I don't know if I can do this," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Dominic's gaze softened, and he placed a hand on her shoulder, a reassuring touch that sent warmth through her. "You don't have to do anything you're not ready for," he said. "But know that the choice is yours. You have the power to change your life, and you deserve it." For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of his words hanging in the air between them. Jasmine didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't keep living in the shadows. She couldn't keep hiding from the possibility of something more. Dominic had given her the courage to take that first step, even if she didn't know where it would lead. But one thing was clear. Whatever came next, she wasn't going to face it alone. The following week, Jasmine found herself walking the same grand halls of the Romano mansion, but everything felt different now. The weight of her decision hung over her like a cloud, shifting her perspective on everything she had once taken for granted. Dominic's words echoed in her mind constantly, reminding her that the choice was hers, that she had more power than she had ever known. But even as she tried to process it all, the reality of her situation continued to settle in. She couldn't shake the feeling of being torn between two worlds. The life she had always known, the quiet, unseen existence of a maid, and the potential that Dominic had shown her. Every time she crossed paths with him, her heart raced. There was something in the way he looked at her that made her feel both seen and exposed. It was as if he understood her better than she understood herself, and it both frightened and exhilarated her. That evening, after finishing her duties, Jasmine found herself standing outside the library, lost in thought. She hadn't meant to be there, but the silence of the room, the warmth of the wood and soft glow of the chandelier, drew her in. She stepped closer, her fingers lightly brushing the doorframe, when she heard footsteps approaching. She turned, her heart quickening when she saw Dominic standing in the doorway, his gaze steady and knowing. "Jasmine," he said, his voice calm, yet with an edge that made her stomach flutter. "I was hoping to catch you." For a moment, neither of them spoke. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a tension that had been building ever since their conversation in the hallway. "Mr. Romano," Jasmine said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't expect to see you here." Dominic smiled, his expression warm but serious. "I thought it was time we talked." "You've been avoiding me," Jasmine felt a flush of heat rise to her cheeks, but she didn't look away. She knew it was true. Since their last conversation, she had been avoiding him, not because she didn't want to speak to him, but because the weight of his words had unsettled her. "I haven't been avoiding you," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I've just been thinking." "Thinking about what?" Dominic asked, his gaze not leaving hers. He stepped closer, and Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. "About everything," she said, her voice barely audible. "About the life I've lived, about the choices I have, or don't have." Dominic's expression softened, and he reached out, gently placing a hand on her arm. The touch sent a shock of warmth through her, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. "You do have choices," he said quietly, "and you deserve to make them." Jasmine swallowed hard, trying to steady her nerves. She didn't know how to respond to him, how to tell him that she wasn't sure she could make those choices. She had always been the one to take what came to her, to follow the path that was laid out before her without question. But now, that path seemed uncertain, and the future stretched out before her like an unknown road. "I don't know if I can," she whispered. "I've never done anything for myself. I don't even know where to begin." Dominic's gaze softened further, and he stepped even closer, until there was only a few inches between them. "You don't have to figure it all out tonight, Jasmine," he said gently. "You just have to trust yourself. Trust that you have the strength to choose your own path." Jasmine's heart pounded in her chest, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She felt the pull of something, hope, maybe, or fear, tugging at her. She had always been afraid of stepping out of the shadows, afraid of what might happen if she did. But now, with Dominic standing so close, offering her his support, it didn't seem so terrifying. She wasn't sure if she was ready to take the step, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid to try. "What if I fail?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Dominic gave her a small, reassuring smile. "Then we'll figure it out together," he said. "You don't have to do it alone." For a moment, Jasmine stood there, her mind racing, her heart torn between fear and the promise of something more. She had never imagined her life could be different, never believed she deserved anything more than what she had. But Dominic's words, his quiet confidence in her, made her wonder if maybe, just maybe, she was capable of more. Slowly, she took a deep breath and nodded. "I'll try," she said, her voice steady for the first time in days. "I'll try to choose my own path." Dominic's smile widened, and he reached out, his hand gently brushing her cheek in a gesture so tender that it left her breathless. "That's all I ask," he said softly. As he turned to leave, Jasmine stood still, the weight of the moment settling over her like a blanket. She wasn't sure what the future held, but in that moment, she knew one thing. She had just taken the first step towards something new, something she had never dared to dream of. And maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of a life she had always deserved. The days that followed Jasmine's decision felt like a blur, as if she were walking in a dream she couldn't wake up from. Every interaction, every glance from Dominic seemed to weigh heavily on her. She tried to focus on her work, but her thoughts kept returning to that moment when she had told him she would try to take control of her own life, to step out of the shadows and into a future that, until now, had seemed impossible. She had spent so many years quietly serving, blending into the background, that the idea of stepping into the light felt both thrilling and terrifying. As much as she longed for something more, the fear of failure, of stepping out of her comfort zone, haunted her. She had always believed she was destined to remain unnoticed, to live a life of service with no expectations of anything different. But now, the possibility of something more had opened up, and it felt like a door that was both inviting and intimidating. The next evening, as Jasmine finished her duties for the day, she found herself standing in the hallway, the weight of the choice she had made pressing down on her. The mansion was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that felt heavy with expectation. She could hear the soft hum of the house's air conditioning and the faint sounds of footsteps in the distance. But there was one sound that cut through the stillness, the sound of Dominic's voice. She turned and saw him walking toward her, his figure silhouetted by the dim light from the hallway. He looked as commanding as ever, but there was something different about the way he walked now, as if he were waiting for something, or maybe someone. "Jasmine," he said, his voice soft but firm. She felt her heart skip a beat as she turned to face him. "Mr. Romano," she said, her voice steady. though she could feel the fluttering of her chest. "We need to talk." The words were simple, but they held so much weight. Jasmine wasn't sure if she was ready for this conversation, but she knew it was coming. And for the first time in a long time, she found herself eager to hear what he had to say. "Of course," she replied, her voice almost a whisper. She followed him as he led her into a small sitting room near the back of the mansion. The room was quiet, with soft lighting and comfortable furniture. The air felt thick with unspoken words as they sat across from one another. Dominic studied her for a moment, his eyes calculating yet not unkind. "You've made a decision," he said, his voice low. Jasmine nodded slowly. "I have." "And?" he pressed, his gaze never leaving her face. "And I'm ready," she said, the words finally spilling out. "I'm ready to do something more. Something for myself." Dominic's eyes softened, and a small, approving smile tugged at his lips. "I knew you would be," he said quietly. Jasmine could feel the heat rise in her cheeks, but she didn't look away. "But I don't know where to start," she admitted, the vulnerability in her voice raw. "I've spent so long being invisible. I don't even know how to begin to change that." Dominic's smile deepened, and he leaned forward slightly, his voice calm and reassuring. "You've already taken the first step," he said. "You've acknowledged that you want something different. That's the hardest part." Jasmine felt a sense of relief wash over her, as if the pressure that had been building inside her was finally starting to ease. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Dominic's gaze was steady, filled with purpose. "Now," he said, "we start making a plan. We take small steps, one at a time, and we see where it leads. I won't lie to you, Jasmine. It won't be easy, but I'll help you every step of the way." The weight of his words settled over her like a blanket. She wasn't alone in this. Dominic was offering her something she had never imagined possible: guidance, support, and the chance to forge a life that was her own. "Thank you," she said, her voice full of gratitude. "You don't have to thank me," he replied. "You've earned this, and you deserve it." Jasmine's heart fluttered at his words. It was the first time anyone had told her she deserved something more. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was worth more than just the tasks she completed each day. She had always believed that her worth was tied to the work she did, to the service she provided. But now, Dominic was showing her that she was worthy simply because she existed, because she had the courage to dream of something different. "I'm ready," she said, her voice firm, determined. Dominic stood, offering her a hand. "Then let's begin," he said, his voice filled with quiet confidence. As Jasmine took his hand and stood beside him, she realized that, for the first time in her life, she was standing on the edge of something new. And whatever came next, she was no longer afraid to take that first step. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind for Jasmine. Every day felt like a small step toward a life she had never imagined for herself. Dominic kept his promise to help her, guiding her in ways she never expected. At first, it was small things, a few words of encouragement here and there, a nod of approval, and, most importantly, his quiet belief in her. It was the first time anyone had taken an interest in her potential beyond her work as a maid. She had always been the one who observed others, never the one being observed. But now, in his presence, she couldn't help but feel like she was part of something bigger. He made her see possibilities she never thought were meant for people like her. She had never believed she could do anything outside the realm of cleaning rooms and serving dinner. But Dominic was showing her that there was more. He asked her about her dreams, about what she really wanted, and for the first time, Jasmine allowed herself to imagine a life beyond the mansion. One afternoon, as Jasmine was dusting the grand library, she was lost in thought. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows on the walls of the room, and she could hear the soft rustling of leaves outside the large windows. She paused for a moment, reflecting on how far she had come. She was still a maid, of course, but she felt a sense of hope that had been absent before. Just as she was about to return to her cleaning, she heard the familiar sound of footsteps. She turned to see Dominic standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable, but his presence undeniable. "Jasmine," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Can we talk?" There was something different in his tone, a quiet urgency that made her heart beat a little faster. "Of course," she said, setting the duster down and walking toward him. She couldn't help but notice how his gaze softened when he saw her, as if she were someone more than just the maid in his household. "What's on your mind?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Dominic looked at her for a long moment before speaking. I've been thinking about what you said. About what you want for your future. Jasmine felt her breath catch. She had never expected Dominic to give much thought to her future. She had always assumed she was just a part of the house, someone to be seen and not heard. I want more, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I want a life that's mine. I want to do something that matters. I don't want to be invisible anymore. Dominic's gaze softened, and he took a step closer to her. You've already made the hardest decision, he said, his voice full of quiet respect. Now, we need to figure out how to get you there. And I'm not going to let you do it alone. Jasmine's heart swelled with emotion at his words. For the first time, someone was offering her more than just the bare minimum. Dominic was giving her a chance to build a life of her own, and she didn't know how to thank him for it. I don't even know where to start, she admitted, the uncertainty clear in her voice. I've spent so much time living for others, I don't even know what I want for myself. That's okay, Dominic said, his voice gentle. We'll figure it out together. It's going to take time, and it's going to take work. But I believe in you. The sincerity in his voice struck a chord deep within Jasmine. She had always believed that her life was meant to be one of quiet service, never daring to ask for more. But Dominic had opened a door she hadn't even known was there. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I don't know what I would do without you. Dominic gave her a small smile. You're welcome, Jasmine. But you should know something. You have it in you to do this. You've always had it in you. His words lingered in the air, and for the first time, Jasmine felt like she was truly seen. Not just as the maid, but as a person with potential, someone who had the ability to make choices and shape her own future. It was a strange, unfamiliar feeling, but it was also incredibly empowering. What's the next step? She asked, her voice more confident now. Dominic smiled, his eyes gleaming with determination. The next step is to get you started. We'll start small, but I'll help you build a foundation. We'll find your strengths, and we'll work from there. As he spoke, Jasmine felt a wave of relief wash over her. For the first time, the future didn't seem so intimidating. She didn't have to have everything figured out right away. She didn't have to be perfect. All she had to do was take the next step, and Dominic would be there to guide her. The next few weeks were filled with small changes. Jasmine began to take on new responsibilities, ones that challenged her and helped her grow. She started managing some of the household tasks on her own, and Dominic slowly began to entrust her with more. Each day, she gained more confidence in herself, and each day, she felt herself drawing closer to the person she wanted to become. She wasn't just the maid anymore. She was Jasmine, someone with dreams, with aspirations, and with the strength to make those dreams a reality. And Dominic was right beside her, supporting her every step of the way. One evening, after a long day of work, Jasmine stood outside the mansion, looking up at the stars. The air was cool, and she could hear the soft rustling of the trees in the distance. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of everything she had experienced over the past few weeks. She had come so far, and yet, she knew this was just the beginning. She didn't know exactly where this path would lead her, but for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid to walk it. The future was hers to shape, and she was ready to take on whatever came next. The days continued to pass, and Jasmine found herself adjusting to a new rhythm. The tasks that once seemed monotonous now felt like stepping stones toward something bigger. Every day brought with it a new challenge, a new opportunity for growth. She was no longer just completing her duties as a maid. She was learning, evolving, and with every passing moment, she felt herself inching closer to the woman she had always hoped to become. Her interactions with Dominic had also become more frequent. He would seek her out, not just for tasks but to engage with her, to hear her thoughts and ideas. It was a shift she hadn't expected, but it made her feel more alive than she ever had before. He wasn't just the powerful boss of the mansion anymore. He was someone who genuinely cared about her, who was invested in her future. One evening, after another long day of work, Jasmine found herself standing by the large windows of the mansion, looking out over the city. The sun was just setting, casting a warm, golden glow over the buildings in the distance. It was one of those rare moments when she had a few minutes to herself, and she relished the quiet. But as she stood there, lost in her thoughts, she heard footsteps approaching. She turned to see Dominic entering the room, his gaze soft but filled with purpose. "Jasmine," he said, his voice low and calm. "We need to talk." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat, unsure of what he wanted to discuss. She turned toward him, her mind racing. "Of course," she said, her voice steady, though she could feel a nervous flutter in her chest. He motioned for her to join him by the window, and as she approached, she couldn't help but notice the way he seemed to study her, almost like he was trying to read her, to understand what was happening in her mind. "You've been making great progress," he said, his tone steady but warm. "I can see the changes in you. But I know this isn't easy. I know you're still unsure about what comes next." Jasmine nodded. She had been trying to keep her focus on the present, on the small steps she was taking toward her future, but there were moments when doubt crept in. "I'm not sure if I'm ready for everything you've promised," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want more, but I'm scared of failing, of stepping outside the life I've known." Dominic looked at her, his gaze understanding. "Fear is a part of it, Jasmine," he said gently. "But it's also the key to growth. You've already stepped outside your comfort zone just by being here, just by accepting that there's more to your life than what you've been given. And that's a huge accomplishment." Jasmine felt her heart swell with emotion. She had never thought of herself as someone capable of great things, but in Dominic's presence, she began to believe it. "I'm still scared," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "But I don't want to live in fear anymore. I don't want to look back and wonder what I could have done if I had just taken a chance." Dominic stepped closer, his presence overwhelming in the quiet room. "You're stronger than you think," he said softly, "and you've already made the hardest decision. Now it's just a matter of taking one step at a time." The weight of his words settled over her like a gentle pressure, and for the first time, Jasmine felt a sense of peace. She didn't have to have everything figured out. She didn't have to be perfect. She just had to keep moving forward, trusting in herself and in the support Dominic was offering her. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice steady, the uncertainty slowly melting away. "Now," Dominic said with a small smile, "we begin to put everything into action. We take what we've talked about, the vision for your future, and we start making it real. One step at a time." Jasmine nodded, the sense of clarity washing over her. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was in control of her own destiny. She wasn't just a maid. She was someone with potential, with dreams, with the ability to shape her own future. "Thank you," she said, her voice full of gratitude. "For everything. For believing in me." Dominic's smile deepened, and he placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did all the hard work, Jasmine. I'm just here to help you see what you're capable of." As he turned to leave, he paused at the door and looked back at her. "Remember this, Jasmine," he said softly. "You're not just doing this for yourself. You're doing this for the woman you've always been meant to be." Those words stayed with Jasmine long after he had left the room. They were a reminder that she wasn't just on a journey of self-discovery. She was on a path to becoming the person she had always hoped to be. It wouldn't be easy, and there would be setbacks along the way, but she now had the strength to face them. The future wasn't so frightening anymore. In fact, for the first time, it felt like it was hers for the taking. As the days went by, Jasmine continued to grow, slowly but surely. The mansion was no longer just a place of work for her. It had become the backdrop to her transformation. She was no longer just the maid who cleaned the rooms. She was Jasmine, someone with purpose, with ambition, with the power to shape her own life. And with every step she took, she knew she was getting closer to the future she had always dreamed of. The weeks that followed were some of the most transformative for Jasmine. Every day she woke up with a sense of purpose she had never known before. The mansion, once a place where she simply existed, now felt like the backdrop of her growth, and the work that had once felt monotonous became a way to prove to herself that she was capable of more. Dominic kept his word, guiding her step by step, encouraging her to stretch her abilities in ways she had never imagined. He had shown her the door to a new life, but it was up to her to walk through it. And with each passing day, Jasmine found herself taking another step forward. One afternoon, as she was organizing the grand dining room, Dominic walked in. His presence filled the room, and though he had never been one to demand attention, there was something about him that commanded respect. "Jasmine," he said, his voice calm, but there was an underlying tone that caught her attention. "Can you come with me for a moment?" Jasmine nodded and followed him through the corridors. They stopped at a door near the back of the mansion, one Jasmine had never noticed before. "This is where we start," Dominic said, pushing the door open to reveal a small, but beautifully furnished office. The desk was neat, papers stacked in an organized fashion, and the shelves were lined with books and documents. It was a space of quiet efficiency, but it felt like a place of possibility. "I want you to start working here," Dominic said, turning to face her. "This will be your office. You'll be in charge of organizing some of the estate's resources, managing schedules, and helping with the planning of events. It's time to take what you've learned and start using it in a more leadership role." Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. "Here? In this room?" she asked, barely able to believe it. Dominic nodded. "You've earned it, Jasmine. You've shown me that you have the drive, the determination, and the skills to do more. Now it's time for you to lead." The words washed over her like a dream. She had never imagined herself in a position like this. She had always thought of herself as the person who simply followed orders, not the one who gave them. But as she stood there, looking at the desk, the books, and the space that could be hers, something shifted inside of her. For the first time, she could see herself in this role. She could see herself managing tasks, organizing the events that took place in the mansion, and playing an active role in the operation of the household. It was a moment of realization. She wasn't just going to watch from the sidelines anymore. She was part of this world now, a world that once seemed so far out of reach. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I've never done anything like this before." Dominic smiled gently, his gaze warm. "You don't need to be ready. You just need to try. I'll be here to guide you, but I know you have what it takes. It's all about taking the first step, Jasmine." The words settled in her heart, and she took a deep breath. She could do this. She had already proven to herself that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. Now, it was time to show everyone else what she could do. Over the next few weeks, Jasmine dove into her new role with determination. Every task, no matter how small, felt like an opportunity to prove herself. She spent hours organizing schedules, managing the household's resources, and coordinating events for the Romano family. Slowly but surely, she began to take ownership of her work, gaining more confidence with each passing day. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was an integral part of the mansion's operation, and people started to see her as someone who could be relied upon. As Jasmine grew in her role, so did her sense of self-worth. She began to understand that her value wasn't tied to her job as a maid or to the way others had always seen her. She was capable of so much more, and she wasn't going to let fear hold her back. One evening, as she was finishing up her work in her office, Dominic stopped by to check on her progress. He stood at the door, his arms crossed, a proud look on his face. "How's it going?" he asked, his voice calm. But there was a note of approval in his words. Jasmine smiled, feeling a sense of pride that she hadn't experienced in a long time. "It's going well. It's a lot of work, but I feel like I'm getting the hang of it." Dominic nodded, his expression softening. "I knew you would. You've come a long way, Jasmine." She felt her heart swell with gratitude. "Thank you, Dominic. For everything. For believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." Dominic's gaze softened, and he took a step closer. "You always had it in you. I just helped you see it." Jasmine stood tall, feeling more confident than ever before. The mansion, which had once seemed like a place she would never escape from, had become the setting for her transformation. She wasn't just the maid anymore. She was a woman with a future, with a purpose, and with the strength to chase her dreams. As she stood there, looking at Dominic, she realized how far she had come. She had taken control of her life, and now she was ready to take on whatever came next. The road ahead wasn't always going to be easy, but with the confidence she had gained, Jasmine knew she could face anything. She wasn't alone in this anymore. She had Dominic, and most importantly, she had herself. The months went by, and with each passing day, Jasmine grew more into herself. Her role in the mansion had changed dramatically, and so had she. The confidence that had once been a flicker was now a steady flame. She was no longer just the maid. She was a woman with a purpose, with a future she was actively creating. The work had been challenging at times, but she felt more fulfilled than she ever had before. Each task she took on was an opportunity to prove to herself that she belonged, that she could do this. There were moments when she doubted herself, moments when the weight of her responsibilities felt heavy, but she no longer hesitated to take them on. She had learned to trust her own abilities. The relationship with Dominic had shifted too. It was no longer just a mentor-student dynamic. Over time, the subtle connection between them had deepened. Dominic had always been supportive, but now, there was something more in the way he looked at her, in the way he spoke to her. Jasmine wasn't sure if it was just her own growing feelings, or if Dominic felt something too. She couldn't deny that his presence had become a source of strength for her, and she had begun to wonder if there was something more between them, something neither of them had said aloud but both had felt. One evening, as Jasmine was finishing her duties in the office, she found herself staring at the clock. It was later than usual, and the mansion had become unusually quiet. The staff had all gone home for the night, and the house seemed to breathe with a different rhythm. As she was about to leave for the night, she heard a familiar voice. Jasmine. She turned around to find Dominic standing in the doorway, his figure framed by the soft glow of the hallway light. His face was serious, but there was something in his eyes, something that made her heart beat faster. "Could I talk to you for a moment?" he asked, his voice soft but firm. Jasmine nodded, her breath catching in her throat. "Of course, Mr. Romano." She followed him down the hall, her heart pounding in her chest. They stopped near the library, and Dominic turned to face her. "I've been watching you," he said quietly, his voice lower than usual. Jasmine froze, unsure of what to say. His words felt heavy, laden with meaning she wasn't sure she was ready to unpack. "You've come a long way," he continued, his gaze intense. "When you first started here, you were uncertain, hesitant. But now, you've grown into someone who commands respect, someone who can take charge. I've watched you transform." Jasmine swallowed, her pulse racing. She hadn't expected this conversation. She had always known that Dominic respected her progress, but hearing him say it out loud made everything feel so much more real. "Thank you," she said quietly, trying to hide the emotions that were starting to surface. Dominic took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "You've earned everything you've achieved, Jasmine. But there's something else I need to say." Jasmine looked up at him, her heart beating faster. She wasn't sure where this conversation was headed, but she knew it was important. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic's expression softened, and he took another step closer, until there was only a small distance between them. "I think I've been holding back," he said, his voice low, almost as if he were speaking to himself. "I think I've been afraid to acknowledge something that's been building for a while." Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. What was he talking about? She didn't know what to say, so she simply waited, her heart racing. "I've been afraid to admit that I care about you, Jasmine," Dominic continued, his voice steady. "Not just as someone who works here, but as someone who has become important to me. Someone who I admire." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Jasmine felt a flood of emotions rush through her. Surprise, confusion, and something else, something warm and unfamiliar. She had never allowed herself to think about Dominic in this way. He had been her mentor, her guide, someone she respected deeply. But now, the air between them felt charged with something different. "Dominic, Jasmine started, but her words faltered. She wasn't sure what to say. She had spent so much time focusing on her own growth, her own path, that she hadn't allowed herself to consider what this relationship really was. "It's okay," Dominic said, his voice gentle. "You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know that I care about you. I wanted you to hear it from me, not just through actions, but through words." Jasmine looked at him, her heart racing. There was so much to process, so much she didn't fully understand. She had come so far in such a short time, and now, with these words hanging between them, she wasn't sure what came next. But for the first time in her life, she didn't feel alone. She felt like she was standing at the edge of something new, something that could change everything. "I don't know what this means," Jasmine said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. "But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to see where this goes." Dominic smiled, and for the first time, the weight between them seemed to lift. "That's all I can ask for," he said softly. "Let's take it one step at a time." As they stood there in the quiet of the mansion, Jasmine felt a sense of peace wash over her. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like she was ready to face it, with Dominic by her side, guiding her through the unknown. The road ahead was uncertain, but together, she knew they could navigate it. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into the mansion all those months ago. She had changed, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she could embrace the future with hope, with courage, and with the belief that anything was possible. The weeks that followed were a blur of change, and Jasmine could hardly believe how much her life had shifted. She had started to embrace the new responsibilities Dominic had entrusted her with, stepping into the role with a confidence that had once seemed impossible. Each day brought new tasks, new challenges, but with each one, she felt herself becoming more capable, more in control of her own destiny. The mansion, once a place where she merely existed in the shadows, now felt like a place where she was actively shaping her future. The work had become fulfilling, and her mind constantly raced with new ideas for how to improve things, how to make herself indispensable. She was no longer just following orders. She was making decisions, leading the way. Dominic's presence had been a constant source of encouragement, and though their interactions had always been professional, there was a subtle shift between them. Every time they spoke, there was an unspoken understanding, a quiet support that lingered in the air. He had given her the tools, the confidence, and the belief in herself that she never thought she would have. And now, she was starting to see the possibilities for her future, ones that she never allowed herself to dream of before. One afternoon, as Jasmine sat in her office, working through some papers, she heard a knock on the door. She looked up to see Dominic standing in the doorway, his usual calm and composed demeanor still in place, but there was something in his eyes that made her heart beat faster. "Jasmine," he said, his voice steady. "I need to talk to you about something important." She set the papers down and stood up, a sense of anticipation bubbling in her chest. "Of course," she replied, her voice steady but her heart racing. Dominic stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. He looked at her for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts, before speaking. "I've been thinking a lot about how far you've come," he began. "You've taken on so much responsibility, and you've proven time and time again that you have what it takes to lead. But now, I think it's time for you to take the next step." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. She had always known that she was capable of more, but hearing Dominic speak about her progress made it feel real. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with curiosity. Dominic looked at her with a seriousness that made her stomach flutter. "I've been considering you for a bigger role," he said. "I think it's time to take you out of this office and into the real leadership position. I want you to manage the entire staff, oversee the operations of the mansion, and be the one to make the big decisions." Jasmine felt a rush of emotions, excitement, fear, and disbelief. She had dreamed of a day like this, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure if she was ready. "You want me to manage everyone?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. Dominic nodded. "Yes, you've earned it. You have the skills, the leadership qualities, and the vision to make this mansion run even better. You've proven yourself, Jasmine. I trust you." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Jasmine was speechless. She had always worked in the background, quietly doing her part, never imagining she would be the one in charge. But now, Dominic was offering her the opportunity to step into a role she had never thought possible. "I don't know if I can," she said, her voice trembling. "This is a huge responsibility. I've never managed people before. I don't know if I'm ready." Dominic took a step closer, his presence overwhelming in the best way. "You are ready," he said, his voice calm and steady. "You've been preparing for this moment for a long time. You've grown, you've learned, and now it's time for you to lead. I believe in you, Jasmine. You've got this." Jasmine's heart swelled with emotion. The fear that had been holding her back slowly started to dissolve. She had worked so hard to get to this point, and now, the opportunity was right in front of her. She had always feared that she wasn't good enough, that she would always be stuck in the background. But Dominic was showing her that she was more than enough. She was capable of doing things she had never imagined. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "I won't let you down." Dominic smiled, his eyes soft with pride. "I know you won't. You've already proven yourself more than enough." As he turned to leave, he paused at the door, looking back at her. "Remember, Jasmine," he said softly, "this is your time. Take it. Own it. You deserve it." After Dominic left, Jasmine stood there for a long moment, letting his words sink in. She was no longer just the maid, the invisible one in the background. She was a leader, someone who could make decisions, someone who could shape the future of the mansion. The future was no longer a distant dream. It was here, within her reach. The road ahead would be challenging, But Jasmine was no longer afraid. She had the strength, the support, and the belief in herself to take on whatever came next. She wasn't alone anymore. With Dominic's guidance and her own determination, she knew she was ready for this new chapter of her life. The next step was hers to take, and she was finally ready to step into it with confidence. It had been a few months since Jasmine had taken on the leadership role at the Romano mansion, and she had settled into the position more comfortably than she ever thought possible. The responsibilities were heavy, but they no longer felt like a burden. With each new challenge, she found herself more capable, more confident in her ability to handle whatever came her way. The staff, once unsure of her, now looked to her for direction, and she had earned their respect. Jasmine had worked hard for this moment, and it felt like every step had brought her closer to the life she had always dreamed of. Dominic had remained a constant presence in her life, offering guidance and support whenever she needed it. He had believed in her before she had fully believed in herself, and now she had begun to see the truth in his words. She wasn't just the maid anymore. She was a leader, a woman with vision, with purpose. The connection between her and Dominic had deepened over time. They had spent countless hours working together, discussing the future of the mansion, the business, and even their own goals. Their bond had become something unspoken, something that neither of them had ever directly addressed, but both had felt. There were moments when their gazes lingered a little longer than necessary, when the silence between them felt charged with something more than just professional respect. It wasn't something either of them had acknowledged out loud, but it was there, an unspoken understanding that neither of them could ignore. One evening, after a long day of meetings and planning, Jasmine found herself in her office, organizing the final details of an upcoming event. The mansion was quiet, the kind of silence that only comes after a busy day. As she went over the notes, her mind began to wander. She thought about how far she had come since her first days in the mansion, how everything had seemed impossible then. But now, she was exactly where she had always wanted to be. She had a purpose. She had a voice. And, most importantly, she had control of her own destiny. The sound of footsteps pulled her from her thoughts, and she looked up to see Dominic standing in the doorway. His usual calm demeanor was softened by the way he looked at her. There was a warmth in his gaze, something that made her heart skip a beat. "Jasmine," he said, his voice low and steady. "I need to talk to you." Her breath caught in her throat. She had grown used to their conversations, but tonight felt different. There was something in the air, something that made her feel like this moment was significant. "Of course," she said, standing up and walking toward him. They stood in the quiet hallway for a moment before Dominic motioned for her to follow him. They made their way to the small sitting room, the same place where they had shared many important discussions. As they sat across from each other, Dominic looked at her with an intensity she hadn't seen before. "I've been thinking a lot about everything you've accomplished," he began. "And I think it's time for us to take the next step. Together." Jasmine felt a lump form in her throat. She didn't know what he meant, but she could sense the weight of his words. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with curiosity. Dominic leaned forward slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. "I'm not talking about the mansion or the staff," he said. "I'm talking about us. About the future. You've become someone I trust, someone I admire. And I believe that together, we can build something even bigger." Jasmine's heart raced. She didn't know if she was ready to hear what he was suggesting, but she couldn't deny the connection that had grown between them. "What are you saying, Dominic?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Dominic paused for a moment, as if carefully considering his words. "I think we've both been dancing around this for a while now," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "But I want you to know that I'm not just your mentor anymore. I care about you, Jasmine. I care about your future, and I want to be there, with you, as you continue to grow, as we build something together." The words hung in the air, and Jasmine's mind raced. She had never expected this, never imagined that Dominic, the man who had been a constant source of strength for her, would express his feelings so openly. She had always believed that she was simply a part of his life, someone he helped along the way. But now, she saw that there was something more between them. "I didn't expect this," she said, her voice trembling. "I've always respected you, Dominic. But I don't know if I'm ready for whatever this is." Dominic's expression softened, and he reached out, gently taking her hand. "You don't have to be ready. I'm not asking you to make any decisions right now. I just wanted you to know how I feel. Jasmine looked at him, her heart racing, as emotions she hadn't allowed herself to feel began to rise to the surface. She had worked so hard to get to where she was, so focused on her own growth that she hadn't allowed herself to consider what her relationship with Dominic really was. But now, with his words hanging between them, she realized how much she cared about him too. It wasn't just about the work anymore. It wasn't just about leadership. It was about them. I care about you too, she whispered, her voice full of emotion. Dominic smiled, his gaze softening. Then we'll take it slow, he said. Together, one step at a time. The weight of his words settled over her like a comforting embrace. They had both come so far, and now, together, they could face whatever the future held. Jasmine wasn't sure what it all meant yet, but she knew one thing. She wasn't alone anymore. With Dominic by her side, she was ready for whatever came next.